podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Cardiff Central podcast. On this squad building special day, we'll be going through the blue and black squad position by position and not just mentioning how much we need locks and tight heads on a loop before finishing with the Rags marching on in the SRC and the first preparing to face the Bulls.
You're listening to the Cardiff Central podcast.
Joining me on the panel today, Steve Coon. Steve, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks.
Good stuff. Simon Jones. Simon, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, mate.
And Harley Worthy. Harley, how are you?
Oh, good, thanks, mate.
Good stuff indeed. So, as I mentioned, we'll be squad building today. Having last week's dodginess on Zoom, I shall once again go into the 2020 mode of sharing my screen and ask the immortal question of, can everybody see that? If you are watching us on YouTube, obviously you should be able to see this. I think the technology will allow that. If you're joining us via whatever podcast platform, though, head over to our socials. We're Cardiff Central or Cardiff_Central or Cardiff Central Podcast, some sort of mix of that on Twitter, on Blue Sky, and on Facebook, so you can see the graphic that was shared on Tuesday morning. The sort of rough guide behind this is it's a mix of known information and educated guessing, a general formula of when somebody signs a long-term, in inverted commas, brackets, contract. That's a 2-year one. However, that's slowly but surely being challenged in recent years as this season, for example, the likes of Rhys Litterick, Ellis Bevan and Gabe Hamer-Webb were all announced as long-term signings last summer and then have either sort of announced as leaving the club or have been linked away. So whether that comes with some sort of transfer fee or whether that's us allowing them to go a bit early, or whether long-term now just means 1 year because Welsh Rugby is in such dire financial straits that long-term deals are anything over sort of 2 months. Not too sure, but it gives a rough enough guide and a sort of flavour of where the team are ahead of next season, and something for us to debate today as well. So we'll go position by position, starting at the front, working back. Steve, I'll come to you first with loose head prop. A bit of news to mention with this one, that Danny Southworth signed a new contract at the club last Friday. He was announced as long-term. Who knows how long that actually is, but I think that's generally good news. And then just generally on the loose head, Steve, I think the question here is probably looking at Ed Byrne being out of contract and Rhys Barrett having made a good impression when he stepped into the first team earlier in the season. Are we happy to sort of stick at the three seniors and Barrett, or are we comfortable with Barrett stepping up now if we were to try and look to save some money in a non-Welsh qualified spot with Byrne?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because the injury came at a really bad time for Rhys Barrett, and it was against Leinster, wasn't it? I remember he looked absolutely gutted when he came off, which suggested it was quite a bad one. But he was just breaking through, and I think he was training with the Wales squad a bit as well, which obviously Matt Sherwood had some influence on that. So obviously he rates him quite highly. But it's difficult to say because that injury did come at a bad time. Ed Byrne, it's also difficult to say with Ed Byrne, isn't it? Because we haven't seen too much of him on the field, but then I think the point of signing him was what he does off the field as much as anything. He's brought in as kind of an elder statesman who'd been part of, I think I'm right in saying he was part of the leadership group at Leinster, which is quite a recommendation. So I'd be inclined to say keep Ed Byrne, or keep both of them. I think because it's such a nutritional position, you need four senior loose heads. I know Cam Taylor-Grokett is quite highly rated, but he's also spent a bit of time out with injury, I think. So yeah, I'd lean to. I would say renew both of them. I'm assuming Ed Byrne's had an impact off the field. Hard to say really, because not being in the camp. But yeah, keep all of them.
It's interesting to see what the balance is in terms of the Rags going forward then as well. I think Cam Taylor-Grokett is still Wales under-20s eligible next season.
Yeah, because he played for Wales under-19s, I noticed.
Yeah.
I noticed because he's a bit younger than I thought he was.
So I think with him being away a bit more, there'll still be Rags opportunities there then for Barrett without blocking any of the guys coming through behind them, which then leads to keeping Byrne so that Barrett can actually get Rags experience rather than having to constantly be a travelling reserve, which I think we've seen a couple of times with the likes of Joe Cowell this season, hasn't played as much for the Rags as we would have liked to because he's been a travelling reserve for the first team an awful lot as well. So yeah, that's fair enough on Loosehead's keeping there. Coming to you, Harley, then on hookers. Evan Daniel there showing us expired. I think that likely turn red relatively soonish with the Ospreys in and around him. We discussed it a couple of weeks ago about sort of him and Lloyd coming through together and needing game time. But if we assume that he is off, are we happy with Belcher, Lloyd, and Hughes as three hookers going forward, three senior options, or would we like to see somebody come in there for a bit of depth?
Well, when you think about it, we spent a lot of the season with it being Evan Daniel and Dav Hughes, and it was Evan Lloyd and Dav Hughes, because we were two of us down the show quickly threadbare list. So for me, it depends how ready Tom Howe is. I haven't really seen him playing for the Rags or anything like that. Or has he been?
No, he's still under 18, so I wouldn't say he's a first team option. I'd suggest that if we went with three and then we had an injury, we'd have to go sort of hunting for somebody.
Sorry,
Potentially.
Tom Howe's a year young, isn't he? He's got another year of school left, I think.
Yes, he's still under 18
Yeah.
next season. Yeah, so he won't realistically be a first team option. I think the other thing to mention with hooker is that Lewis Morgan, the Carmarthen Quins hooker, has trained with us a couple of times this season. He was enlisted in our European squad, ex Scarlets Academy. So maybe somebody like him potentially just to add a bit of depth, Harley.
Yeah, I think you need four. So I'd say for front row, ideally you want four for the length of the season. The attrition, how attritional it is. Even if the fourth choice guy is more there for training and as a nicety, it's because you go very quickly from, oh, it's nice having him, to, oh shit, we need him fit and playing 80, especially with Welsh team injury record. So yeah, I think you need a gap there. What
Are you-
sort of hooker you go for? I probably wouldn't waste a non-Welsh qualified squad spot on him. You'd be looking at, if is it Alan Rees play for the Rags? Sort of the senior one. You'd want someone who's sort of been around the block a bit, but maybe not necessarily
the other
pro.
options with the Rags, obviously Alan Rees is the starter, but the two behind him are Gavin Parry and Charlie Manship. Gavin Parry was a Scotland under-20 cap last season, and was with the academy for a short while. Charlie Manship was going to school in England somewhere, and was part of Bristol's under-18 setup, and he's only just out of that. He'll be 19, 20. But I suppose my other question then, Harley, just to finish on hooker, is are we happy with Dav Hughes as third choice stepping up there with no qualms with that on his performances for us so far?
Absolutely none at all. I think he's proved whenever he's been called upon, he's absolutely fantastic. Hooker, his darts are spot on. He mixes his game round with a loose, similar to Belcher and Lloyd as well. So he fits slots into that system fine.
I think that's a really important point as well, Harley, is the fact that those three hookers, there's size differences between them, but they all play a similar type of game as well. I think we talked about it last week or the week before about the changes between Thomas Williams being scrum half and Ellis Bevan being scrum half and being very different players. So you which is fine if you want to kind of tighten the game up. But I think with hooker, it's quite good to have three that play a similar style of play. So you'd want somebody to come in maybe in that mould as well.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to tight head then, Simon. And I put out this graphic on socials earlier, and I think probably about 85% of the replies were just, we need tight heads, was the general consensus. Just sort of going in depth on it a bit, looking at that list at the moment, as far as my sort of Googling and general knowledge where we don't actually have a tight head signed on next season. I think we'd all agree that Azarati we'd hope to sign him, and I haven't heard that he's not likely to be there next season. We know Rhys Litterick is leaving for Edinburgh. Will Davis King then is turning 28 this summer. Not too sure what his contract scenario is. He's like one or two other sort of fringe players where I think we've signed them to new deals in the last few years, but haven't sort of openly announced that because they're not the sort of big flashy headline type grabbing type players. But looking at that list, just how many tight heads do we need to add? Is it the case of, do we just kind of bank it all on one really quality option, or do we spread it around a bit and get two in just to make sure we've got sufficient depth there? What would be the ideal situation for Cardiff, I think, going forward this summer?
Well, I think it's also working out who will go with Wales, because Asrati's kind of been in and out a bit. It fell out of favour for a little while. You'd assume that we're not blessed with tight heads. You'd assume that he will probably, whoever the next Wales coach is, will be in and around that squad. So, you need at least 2 others, I would have thought. I mean, Will Davis-King's an interesting one because he's one of those that you see him come onto the pitch and you're like, well, that's he looks like he's got the potential in terms of his size, but it's never quite lived up to what you kind of see physically as a player. And I don't know, props develop late. We talk about that a lot, but he's 28 now, and you'd expect to have a kind of a breakthrough this season or, the season before to really establish himself. So, yeah, I mean, it's top of the recruitment list, really, isn't it? I think you'll need at least 2 with Litterick going and the contract uncertainty with the others. I would suggest it is a non-qualified Welsh player as well. We're bringing in. We're looking for somebody that will just turn up that kind of Felice model of just rolling out 7 out of 10 performances, just being there, being a bit of a workhorse that can step in when Aserati's with Wales. But yeah, I mean, Joe Cowell's still a few years off. I don't know how old he is. I know he's seen as a prospect.
He'll be a little bit older because he has come through the university pathways, and so I suspect he'll be 22, 23 rather than you sort of what you might expect as 19, 20 just coming into senior academy. But yeah, adjusted for how long he's been in the pro game, he's still very raw in that sense. Yeah,
so you'd expect him maybe to get a bit of game time somewhere next season. Could start bringing players into the professional game at that level. So as long as he stays injury free, you'd expect him to be given a bit of game. So, you could probably get away with 1, but I think you'd need 2 with Litterick moving, and you've got space. You've got space in the with the non-Welsh qualified with who's leaving to kind of really target that. But they're not easy to come by.
I think
good quality tight heads to lock out that scrum.
That's the key point, I think. And my follow-up question to you on tight heads would be, do the club have to sort of row back, or Jockey in particular has to row back on what type of player he's looking for to a degree? Because I think we're obviously a team that builds itself on playing high tempo, expansive attacking rugby. And we ask our props to do then a lot of that. Guys like Aserati, Southworth, Domachowski, even Litterick has developed this. That they're very mobile. They're good with their hands. Do we have to say, right, okay, we're still lower down the budget pecking order. We really need a good tight head, especially in the sort of deep dark months of February and March and the end of November when internationals are away. Can we do sort of similar to what the Ospreys almost do with Tom Botha, who these days is a good scrummager but offers very little to nothing around the field now? Do we have to say, right, let's just sign a good quality scrummaging tight head and we'll carry him through the rest of the game if we can, just to lock out that scrum and give us that platform to play off?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can with a tight head have somebody just to do that job. You'd still want somebody that can play 60, 65 minutes at a push. She wouldn't want a situation where you kind of have somebody that is playing 40 minutes or 30 minutes and then is blowing and you're kind of like, right, we're going to have to bring somebody else on. So it's not that kind of luxury, or let's just get a name in that's right at the end of their career and we'll get a good 30 minutes out of them. It's still got to be somebody who can go when needed, because I think there's a couple of times where Aserati stayed on for quite long periods of games as well. So I think if there's one position, you can probably have somebody that isn't, as to use Jockey's terms, a typical Cardiff player. It's probably tight head. And if we're going to go forward, the scrum's been good this year, though. It has been, if we're looking at Aserati as our first choice, you want somebody when he's not available, or if, like happened a few times this season, when the scrum's on skates, you just bring somebody on to shore it up, stop giving away penalties there, because we are letting teams out too easily, or teams are getting field position from it. So I think it's a tactical decision as well to have somebody on the bench that can just do that. and then we don't have to. We can cover the wider expanses with other players that are mobile. If you look at our locks, I think that's a key one as well. If we get a more mobile lock in that can cover, or you've got Donnell in there, maybe they can double up with some of the workload around the part that you'd miss with the less mobile tight end.
That mention of the name coming in for the 30-minute lock sort of sparked flashbacks of Selesi Mafu coming off the bench.
Exactly who I was. That's exactly who I was thinking of. And I'm sure at one point he came on as a sub, hit a ruck, and immediately got yellow carded and went off again.
I've never seen anyone blow that much just running onto the pitch before. Quite remarkable achievement for somebody to get that size as well. Unbelievable. Segueing nicely then off of what Simon said, Steve, into locks. If we look there, obviously Seb Davis, I've put him in red and then realised actually I don't think the Dragons have officially confirmed him yet, but I think it's sort of one of the worst kept secrets in Welsh rugby at the moment that he's heading there. But with Teddy, McNally and Thornton being under contract, Tom Cottle coming in, he's played a fair bit for RGC in Super Rugby Cymru since the under-20s, and I imagine will be part of the under-20 squad this summer again. I suppose the question, I guess, is is this the time to go big on like a proper second row, real marquee signing, or are we in a decent position there where actually adding just a little bit more depth is fine and we spend elsewhere?
I think second row, it's a case of quantity over quality, maybe. I think I'd rather see us bring in a couple of second rows rather than to go big on just one really expensive one. Because I mean, the thing people always say about Cardiff is they never sign second rows. But if you look back at our recruitment over the past few seasons, we basically signed at least one second row every year. It's more a case that we don't sign enough of them. I mean, this past season, Teddy Williams and McNally, that's probably been the best starting second row combination we've had going back to, say, Paul Tito and Bradley Davis. Where we've suffered is depth. I mean, Josh McNally has basically been flogged, hasn't he? I mean, against Connacht, he looked absolutely exhausted. So I think with second row, it's more a case of avoiding that situation again. I would also include Ben Donnell in with the second rows because I know he regards himself as a six who can play four, but when he's played second row for us, I think he's looked really useful there and could develop into more of a second row. And we're rumoured or strongly rumoured to be bringing in George Knott. So I think possibly rather than going for the big superhuman South African second row, everybody says we need, I think it's more about bringing in a couple of George Knott type players, and maybe also looking at your lovely table. We've only got one academy option in the second row, which doesn't feel like enough, and there weren't any at all this year, were there? So possibly if we could nab someone like Kenzie Jenkins from Bristol, that would be a very useful signing. But yeah, I think rather than going for the one big superhuman bruiser, we need to think in terms of just mass, buy in bulk. Go to the wholesalers rather than go to Waitrose for our second rows.
I think as well, it's around how important those second rows are for the scrum. I mean, Harley, you can probably talk more about this, having played, telling us you're playing, all those positions. But where we've had good scrummages, sometimes we've had lightweight second rows, which means that we get pushed off the ball because there's not the ballast behind them. But with those three that are in green, Teddy, Josh, and Rory Thornton, you've got size there as well. So I think you're almost looking at that as a pairing. I know you usually look across the front row, but that tight head lock behind Azarati or whoever plays that position, I think is quite important as well. So I think it's buy in bulk with bulk, if that makes sense. You just want some players in there that can. I think we want players in there that can scrummage. I think we've got mobility elsewhere, to be honest.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Rory Thornton has become a bit more prominent this year? Because towards the start of the year, I in my mind, I was thinking Rory Thornton was getting ready to retire or semi-retire and maybe go into coaching with the Rags, which he has done a bit. but he's spent more time in the 23 than we probably expected. And I'm wondering if that's part of the impact of Cornel Van Zyl, who was a second row, who was an international second row. And I'm guessing he has a very clear idea of what he wants from his second rows and also can develop them. And also speaking of George Knott, I mean, a few people have already kind of dismissed that signing, but I think Van Zyl will have coached him before. I think they would have been at London Irish at the same time. So he's going to have quite a good idea of what George Knott can do. And I'd be interested to see what other second rows we do bring in, because I'd imagine Van Zyl would be influencing that.
That just want to
Sorry, go on, Harry.
hop on that with the scrummaging lock. I mean, I think we're quite lucky that the three locks in green, to varying extents, are both very good. Are all very good set piece operators, both in the scrum lineup and quite mobile as round. George Knott, I'd say, is probably is almost a Bendel type hybrid lock. So I think if we're going to get another one in, I think if we are going to go for one extra one instead of a direct replacement for Seb Davis and that sort of third, fourth choice, we're looking at basically a number 5 lock. So we want someone who's going to push hard, maybe jumps at line out. But you want basically, again, it is that huge bit of bulk in the pack, so that if you need to take Teddy off, you need to take Josh off, you've got someone who's there and could just lock out that scrum, and you're not going to shift. So when you do have so if we are relying on Joe Cowell a bit more, he's got a bit of confidence there, keeping him up as well.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing to say about second rows is, as with tight head, this is where we need to use our non-Welsh places. A big part of recruitment is going to be deciding, where do we use that allocation we're allowed, and it probably has to be those two positions. And I know we've been probably saying that every season for the past 10 years, but it remains the case. I think we've got at least 2 non-Welsh qualified places available, and they probably have to be used on tight head and second row.
I guess my follow-up, Steve, I think there'll be some listening who are finding that far too positive regarding Cardiff locks, and that is the one thing we all cling to, that we need more better locks. But let's say Teddy Williams next season, I think we'll probably see less of him. He's going to be more and more involved in the Team Wales setup. And Josh McNally, judging by his comments about he thought he was done last year, he signed another year deal. I think it's probably fair to say that it's the last 12 months we're going to see of Josh McNally before he potentially hangs up his boots. So if he's coming towards the end a bit, would we be happy going to a Connacht or somewhere like a Glasgow in the middle of the Six Nations period with a George Knott and a Rory Thornton a second row? Is that good enough to get the win, or even with is it coming into a better setup now with Van Zyl there and with a more settled pack, that we can carry that to victory in those games, which can define whether you get success at the end of the season or not?
Well, again, I'd have Ben Donnell in there as like my starting second row if Teddy and McNally aren't available. Particularly going by his performance against the Ospreys, he's well capable at this level in the second row. Him and Thornton and George Knott. It's, you say it and it feels wrong, but going by what Van Zyl has done with our second rows so far, they have performed beyond what we may have expected, and you'd hope that would continue. But like I say, a couple more names in there, a bit more options is going to be the secret there.
Just to say on the academy stuff as well, Tom Cottle, people may not have seen him play too much, but chatting to a few guys around the academy, there's quite a great deal of excitement about him. He is a legitimate big ball carrying option, and I would expect to see a name like Sonny McCabe or Niall Moore coming out of the under-18s this season added to that academy stocks. I think over the summer, Niall Moore's played for
Teddy Williams' brother is
yes, Gabe Williams is there or thereabouts as well. So I think they'll add a few. There is also a lad whose name is, I think it's Harry Lewis, who they've signed to a junior academy deal. But I think he was training with the under-16s last year. He was still under 15 and couldn't play for them, I think, because he was actually too young. So they're obviously looking even further
I've
ahead
got to
and
be
making
honest,
sure
the first
they're not
time
losing players.
I remember noticing Tom Cotter was in that Wales under-20s versus Scotland game when he had that really stupid card.
Yeah, yeah.
We just signed this guy, haven't we? But yeah, hopefully he's capable of more than that.
Moving on to the back row then, Harley, and I mean this is going to feel weird to say as well because obviously we should. This is where we should be signing multiple open sides, as many as we can get in. But actually, with Basham coming in and Young going out, are we sort of happy with where we are? That even if Faletau does leave, are we in quite a good spot there, or do we need to add a bit more depth? Just judging on the fact that it is such an attritional position.
I think we show again going back to this season. It showed that it only took a few injuries for us to go. Well, hang on, we're playing a 6 at 7 and those sorts of things. Now the question is then is Alex Mann a long term look at maybe moving him, making transitioning more into an open side, blind side sort of hybrid. I mean you've got a question mark of Gwyn Bradley, and are we ever going to get a fit run out of him? If we keep him. Otherwise then you got Lucas De La Rue, who again I think for me is more of one of those players who sort of flitters around the back row. I don't think he's necessarily true open side. I think maybe what would happen is you'll see Dan Thomas, who also was re-signed last week. Him probably being almost your first choice 7, with both of them your first choice 6, and then both of them maybe playing a lot more 7 than perhaps we've had him in the past, where he's seemed to be that more hybrid or covering the whole back row player. I said if it's a choice between an open side and a good tight head or tight head lock, I'd probably lean towards there where we've got more depth. If we've got the money to spare and we can pick up almost like your Will Boyd, sort of probably is never going to be an international, but will do a job for you at club level and will end up being more valuable than you think. I said I wouldn't go non-most qualified for this one. I mean, if we are struggling to sign locks and Ben Donald is going to be used there primarily in this thing, then yeah, you're probably looking at someone to pick up again. But then I'd probably lean towards more a blind side then, and maybe another in that mold of. But I said with George not Ben Donald, I think you've got 6. You've got
Are
that
we
sort
happy
of
with our
6.
back row stocks, Harley? Then with this sort of changing approach that we've seen, because I would look down that list and Dan Thomas pops up with turnovers, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a fetcher as such as a 7 who's going to sort of get over every ball. Is that working for us? This new sort of more physical approach and sharing the turnovers around? Or is that where we should be going really to compete a bit more up front, having that back row back up to the tight 5?
Well, I mean, it's hard to argue with being 6th in the table. Or sorry, fifth, 6th in the table. It's we are winning more games. I think it's suiting our players a lot better. I think when you've got one obvious jackal threat, I mean, it's something you see with Clement Raphael. If you haven't got someone who's there able to chop players down and give him all the time to get over the ball, then the other team is targeting and blasting them off. But when, Ben Donald can pop over the turnover, or it's Alex Mann, or it might be Evan Lloyd, or Callum Sheedy is the new turnover king of Cardiff. It becomes a little bit hard. You've got to be a bit harder, and you can't just think, oh no, this. And then the opposition are like, well, no, we've got to make sure we're going for every rack, and then they're more likely to do something stupid, and then that gives us penalties. I don't think the big thing is if we're at least smashing players backwards and maybe going a little bit more for the turnover and in the tackle, either by dislodging the ball or mauls, which, given the head injury stuff, is maybe not the best tactic. But I think the way that Mellon wants us defending, I think maybe less out and out fetches and more physicality and just being very good at getting people to the floor is the way we're going.
I think if you look at that, both Man, either Alan Lawrence or Faletau, like back row, there's a lot of, it's really physical, and I think that we've seen that balance more towards the end of the season, where we have match teams that physically overwhelm us at times, and I think whether through availability or strategy, we've kind of hit on a way of operating that still allows us to turn ball over, but also, as you say, Harley, we're kind of winning penalties because we're physical at the breakdown, we're counter-rucking a bit, or making a bit of a mess of the breakdown, or people are worried that we're going to turn the ball over. So they then either dive on the wrong side, come in from the side, or things like that. So it's almost like we're winning turnover penalties, but in a different way. And I think Thomas Young, I think he's an outstanding player. I think he's done, watching him play has been an absolute pleasure for the last few seasons, and I'm gutted that he's leaving. But it does start to feel quite different to actually what everything else is being structured around him. To have that player that is that very kind of, as you said, a fetcher, very pure turnover king. And I think what we'll miss probably from his back row is his pace, because I don't think we've got a necessarily quick back row now. But I think we've decided to go in a different direction there. So it will be more of an Alex Mann, Dan Thomas, I would have thought we'd be looking for, to kind of do your turnovers, but actually just get people down, just tackle them down, and then let's see where we go from there. Because as I said a couple of weeks ago, against Ospreys and Munster, one of the biggest risks was us trying to turn the ball over on halfway, and giving them a penalty. That actually we were quite comfortable. You stay there, you're not going to get past. So, maybe it is a change in system where we have kind of a bit more equality across that back three that can all do the physical job, and we don't have that turnover expertise.
Yeah, I think on the pace point, it'd be interesting to see what happens with Lucas De La Rua, I think, next season, because he is somebody who has got a bit of gas about him. We've seen it with the Rags and with the 20s. He's done his time with both now, really. I think he'd probably be turning 21, 22. And in a 6-2 bench, he could be quite a good option to bring on in the absence of Young there, just to add a bit of youthful energy in the last sort of quarter of games. I agree with Harley that he is a 6, 7, 8. He doesn't, he can slot in wherever and do a job. He doesn't have a specific position in that sense, but he's quick, he's physical, he's got a good set of hands, and with a number of Cardiff back rowers across the under 18 and 19 Wales squads over the last few weeks, I imagine we'll see a couple more coming into the academy next year. So it'd be interesting to see how much game time Lucas De La Rua gets with the first team next season.
Also, William Bradley's shown a fair bit of pace when he's played. When he's had the opportunity, he's looked very quick indeed. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with him, because obviously he's missed a hell of a lot of rugby with his injuries, and apparently he's still with us. The Dan Thomas re-signing article seemed to indicate that Bradley's still going to be with us. You'd think, I think he must be about 24, 25 now. So you'd think he'd want to be, he would want to be somewhere where he will play now that he's fit. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. I'm still kind of semi hoping we use him as bait to get his brother in, because his brother would be a very handy player to have in the centre. But yeah, Bradley could be the answer to that, to get in the flanker who has that physicality but is also pretty quick.
And Bradley got him in orange or unknown at the moment, because similar to sort of Will Davis King, the last contract I found that Bradley had signed was 2020, I think. So unless we'd signed him to a major 6-year contract back then, I'd suggest there's been a few that have gone unannounced. So not really sure exactly where his contract. But yeah, as Steve said, with Dan Thomas's new contract, it was mentioned that he'd be competing with Gwilym Bradley. So I assume he is hanging around. Moving on to the backs then. Scrum half, not going to dwell on too long, because it is pretty settled as it is. Mulder's now clear first choice. Ali Davis is the experienced option. Bevan seems still likely to head west this summer, with a replacement lined up who still not going to break confidence by saying who it is, but there's something coming in, so it's pretty settled there with Sean Davis on the way through. Fly half then, Simon. I guess the big question here, obviously, Tina Stabia leaving, Callum Sheedy still there, and Johan Lloyd coming in. With Lloyd, how important is it going to be for us to get him in the team, mainly for his goal kicking? And if so, where does that happen? And does Harry Wild perhaps coming out of the 20s and needing a bit of first team game time also link into where we're going to use Lloyd next season?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it depends on whether we just bite the bullet and give goal kicking to Ben Thomas permanently. I think there is something about it was very strange against Munster of Thomas taking some of the kicks and Sheedy taking others with no rhyme or reason as to who was taking what kick at times, because there were kicks that you're thinking, well, that's out of Sheedy's range, and he was taking it, and others that suddenly Ben Thomas would be stepping up. So either way, for next season, that's got to be agreed that we're going to go with Ben kicking the goals. Ben does kickoffs anyway. I think he does dropouts as well. That allows Sheedy to just concentrate on managing the game, which we've all agreed he's done brilliantly in the last few weeks in terms of that, and has really grown into that player. Lloyd at 10. I don't know whether it's worked at the Scarlets. I see a lot of Scarlets feedback going, he's a fullback. He's not a 10. Great player, but you signed a fullback. Give him a go there. I've got absolutely no issue. I think again, the Wales question comes in of does the new coach, because Sheedy's what, 28, 29? He'll have come back with, I want to be in the shake-up for the Welsh 10 jersey. No one's grabbed that by the scruff of the neck at the moment. I think Anscombe's, I can't see him being capped again. It looked like his legs had gone completely towards the end of the Six Nations. So that is up for grabs. So you could have a situation where both Sheedy and Lloyd are with Wales, which would leave us really short. So I think, expect to see Harry Wild there. Are we inclined to bring someone else in? I don't think we probably are, because you could move Ben Thomas across if needed. But it does feel just a little bit light, just having two senior 10s. If Rory Jennings goes as well, I think Stefan Manuel played at 10 at the weekend for the Rags. He was certainly down to play there, but I don't think he is a 10. I think it's one of those where if somebody is available and the price is right and it works, let's get another bit of experience in, because it would only take a knock to Sheedy or Lloyd and then suddenly you're in a spot of bother. So it's kind of like scrum half. You've got two decent starters. You want somebody else just to keep the competition up as well, because I don't think Ben Thomas now his long-term future is at 10 or will be seen as a 10. I think he's nailed that 12 jersey down. So he seems to enjoy playing more at 12 as well. So I think we need someone, but it can't be someone who expects a lot of game time, if that makes sense. Almost a kind of like David Hughes has been in hooker for us this season. Come on, never done anything wrong when he's come on. Happy to kind of fulfill that role of replacement, starting every so often.
I wonder if, I wonder if somebody like Josh Thomas was sort of doing that first this season with the Rags, where he was a Rags player but training full time with the first team. Obviously, he's gone to sign with the Dragons now to the end of the season, but I don't know actually he's actually had any minutes there, certainly minimal, if any. So I wonder if maybe they could look at getting him back. I suppose with Lloyd, I guess, is his position, do you think, going to be, is he going to wear 23 more often than not in a 6-2 bench? Is he the ideal 23 there as a sort of flexible bench option?
Go on, Harley. You look like you're about to jump in.
I think he could be 23 in a 7-1, because he has apparently covered and played scrum half a bit. And I could see him doing that. And that
He's almost as versatile as you, Harley.
He's a lot better rugby player than I am by miles. I am versatile by the fact that I'm equally useless in every position I play. I think with Joe and Lloyd, I do think a bit of the problem has been like Bristol's probably not the best place to develop a 10 because of just how mad and weird that system is. And then I think Scarlet struggle that they don't have an attack coach who's played 10 and doesn't know how. There's no one, Dwayne Peel was a phenomenal player for Wales, but he was a scrum half. But Scarlet's produced fantastic scrum halves, almost as many as us when they're not buying them, importing them from us. But I do wonder, having Jockey, who is, did go through his career as a 10, might help Lloyd round off those rough edges in the game, because his kicking game is unbelievable when he deploys it, and his goal kick is great. So actually having someone who might be able to sort of show him or in this situation, maybe go for this as opposed to that, might round him off. But also, I think the Cardiff system is probably better suited to Johan Lloyd than the Scarlets one. Whereas I think a lot of stuff's done on 10, where Ben Thomas takes a lot of the game management stuff. He shares that as well, and a lot of the kicking. So I can see Johan Lloyd going. I do agree with Simon. I think two senior tens is a bit of a risk. Um, but I'd go. I mean, Harry Wild seems to been there and done that now. I think the only thing left for him to do, the only way we'll find out if he is ready to be a pro rugby player is if he gets some pro minutes. Now, I think he's done everything pretty much. He's been good for the Rags from what little I've been able to see of them, and his under-20s performances have always gone all right, as all right as you can be behind a backwards pack, and so that's good experience for senior rugby in a Welsh side.
It's like
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how he goes for 20s this summer. Wild, I think if he does have a really good World Cup backing up his Six Nations, there will be calls for him to go in quite quickly. Simon, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's kind of like the tight head lock discussion we've just had. It's fly half and centre. So I know we're going to come on to centre in a moment, but we need centre. We need some centres. So if you could have a centre that could also play 10, if needed, that isn't Ben Thomas. So that Rory Jennings that was brought in to kind of go, well, you can fit him in at 10 if needed. He can play at 12, might be able to play at 13 as well. So you could take that as a package and go, right, we're going to look for somebody who's predominantly a centre that can play inside centre, that can be a game playing 12 like Ben Thomas, but we can slot him in at 10 if we need him there. And that then takes the pressure off actually probably one of the most expensive positions to probably find a player for as an outside half. But I'm not saying it's cheap to find a 10-12, but you're probably more likely to find a 10-12 or 12-10. Not that makes a difference which way I put the numbers around. That's just my head, the way it works. But yeah, so thinking about those collectively is probably the way to go about solving that issue.
Well, that leads me on nicely then, Steve, to centre. And as Simon says, it's very much separate, although I've put them all in one list there. We don't have 12 13s at Cardiff because of the very, very different way that we use them. So looking at the list there, we've only got two centres, senior centres definitely for next season in Ben Thomas, and I've put Mason Grady down. But obviously, we've deployed him on the wing more often than not so far in his Cardiff career. Rory Jennings, his contract is expiring this summer. He's been linked with the re-emergence of Worcester in the Championship. Ray Lilo also expiring this summer, yet to determine whether he's retiring or whether we're going to offer him a bit more. So looking at inside centre to start with, I guess there's sort of I listed three options of what you can do. You can re-sign Jennings and give yourself a bit of depth there. You can solve it from within, whether you use Beetham as a 12, whether Stefan Manuel, you see him ready as stepping up, or you go to the market and, as Simon said, look for somebody who is that playmaking. We were linked with Joe Hawkins quite extensively earlier in the season, that 10-12. What would be the best option for you there?
Yeah, I was going to say you may have done your table completely wrong, and instead of having fly half and centre, you should have had say like 5/8 and then just one centre because that is basically how we play. I mean, it's like the scrum half is like the rugby league dummy half, and then we have the two rugby league halfbacks at 10 and 12. So yeah, thinking about that, I mean, in that inside centre role, Ben Thomas is outstanding. Stefan Emmanuel also seems to be ready-made for it, but I think he's still only going to be 19 next year. So do you want to be dependent on him? We were just talking about the versatility of Johan Lloyd. I'm pretty sure he can play 12. I think he has for Bristol. I mean, they played him basically everywhere other than 10. I'm pretty sure he could play 12. But I still think we need someone else who can fill that role because I don't think you want to be in a situation where you have to pick Stefan Emmanuel there because I'm sure if we picked him there for the odd game, he'd do very well. But it's another thing kind of being dependent on him having to play every single week when he's still fairly young. So I think I possibly would look to re-sign Rory Jennings. And if not re-sign Rory Jennings, then find a player who's similar. Um, the trouble with that being that Jockey seems to want something very, very specific from his 12. He wants him to be a playmaker who's also, sturdy enough to play, to play in the centre. And those players are actually quite rare, which is why I think we've ended up using a non-Welsh qualified slot and going for Rory Jennings. So it's a key role, and even if we don't keep Rory Jennings, I think possibly still bring in a non-Welsh qualified player because to have that cover because it is so important to the way we play. I think we found ourselves having to use a makeshift 12 in that very important role with Jockey's system. We'd find ourselves struggling. And with Jacob Beetham, I think Jockey has said that he doesn't see him as a 12. Which surprised me slightly because I think Gregor Townsend was rumoured to be pushing really hard for him to play 12 at Edinburgh and Scotland, possibly. I'm pretty sure other clubs would play him there, but Sherrod doesn't see him as a 12 within the way we play. So yeah, re-sign Jennings or sign someone similar, because that's a really big position for Cardiff.
I just, as people who've listened to the pod since I've been on, it's been about a year now. I will get Jacob Beetham as a 12 tattooed on my forehead if it's absolutely necessary to convince Jockey
Yeah,
that that's the way to
I
go.
totally get why you would want Jacob Beetham at 12. I can see it, but he seems to be so specific about what he wants from a 12 that Jacob Beetham isn't going to do it for Cardiff. 13, possibly.
Yeah, I don't disagree much on Jockey since he's arrived as head coach, but yeah, I can't. I just like you're absolutely right in what you're saying, but I just don't understand what Jockey isn't seeing there with him at 12. I just think
I
he's
think it's to
got
do with
everything.
distribution, isn't it? It must be because I'd have thought Jacob Beetham's kicking game actually might solve a problem for us because he can get a real distance with his kicking. And
Yeah,
his place kicking option, but I think it must come down to distribution, as in it's not enough to be able to distribute. You want someone who's really, really good at it, as he's 12.
But isn't he a?
yeah.
But didn't Jacob Beetham start off as a 10? If I remember rightly, he was to the academy. He sort of was going through as a 10, so you'd
Yeah,
think his
but Dan
distribution
Hart's
would
with a
be
10,
fine.
he couldn't pass either. So
Fair,
He
fair
didn't need
point.
to, Steve. He didn't need to.
Steve, then just going on to outside centre, then if Ray Lilo does call it a day, as we expect, sad day that will be. Are we are we able to sort of botch it together with Grady and Elijah Evans probably looking for first team minutes next season, or do we really need to get like an experienced head in there with them?
I mean, the other option's Millard, isn't it? I thought
Yeah.
he was an absolute revelation against Munster. I never thought in a million years I'd say it, but I mean, there were moments in that game where half a second I was sort of catching myself thinking, "Well, it's a great read from Braley." Oh no, it's Harry Millard. Um, so he could end up continuing to surprise and astonish by being our 13. But yeah, with 13, I think we probably were understaffed going into this season. I think we always knew we might end up being stretched there. So if Ray does go, I think we would have to find a replacement. Not that that's going to be particularly easy. I really hope Ray stays on because if he's able to keep playing, if he's able to keep playing at the level he has been, then I just, carry on doing what you're doing because there's so much knowledge and experience there. You don't let that go cheaply, do you?
Yeah, I think my
Particularly
preference
with
would
so
be
many
to
young centres who can learn from him.
My preference would be for Ray to sign on some sort of coaching deal and sort of Dan Fish it every week, where he just comes back out of
Yeah.
retirement every week when we need him.
Well,
Something
maybe
like
he could sign for the Rags. He could be
yeah.
a great player for the Rags. Great way to finish.
Um, Leading on to back three, then Harley. I think fullback's pretty set. We've got Winnett there. We've got Beetham. We've got Matty Young coming through. Wing's an interesting one though. I think Gareth McIvory mentioned it on Twitter as well that we've got we've got quite a lot of options there all of a sudden, particularly on that left winger sort of nippier thing. If you think of Adams, Hamer Webb, and Grady as just sort of bigger right wingers, but then we've got Stevens contracted, Tom Bowen still looking to come through, and then Millard and Cabango, who don't obviously appear to be contracted for next season at this point. Is it a case that we just re-sign them all? They're all really good players, and we go for it, or can we have a look at saving a bit of money there? Is that too much depth, if anything?
I think it's maybe a time where we've got to be a bit more ruthless and maybe say, can we afford to carry a winger who hasn't played much? And maybe I mean, Cabango has been an electric player whenever he's played for Cardiff, but those appearances are very few and far between. And he has got a bad injury profile, and it's the case that with another setback, how likely realistically is he to be able to get a season out of him? Because that might be a spot we could free up, because we have been struggling for wings, and having a fit Cabango would have been really helpful. I think Millard, if he's not currently under contract, we need to re-sign him. Same for Gabe Paperware, but I think they've shown their value this season when called upon. Especially if we're looking at Harry Millard covering the 13 jersey as well. I think so. I think Tom Bowen. I mean, similar to the point I was going to make with Stefan Emmanuel, with the centres is they've not been given too many opportunities in the first team, but when they've turned up, when they've looked at home. They look. Tom Bowen looks ready, and I think if you've got a speedster like him, someone who can just give you that bullshit factor of make something happen, you're probably looking, well, I don't think we need as many true senior ones, and maybe the likes of a Cabango might go. I think with the full way we run our 14 jersey, I think you need to have a little bit. You probably need more of our 14s than our 11s because just the physicality of it all, and Josh Adams isn't getting any younger. You might want to nurse him through a few things a bit more. That I said I'll keep Gabe just the physical. For me in that list, if you're gonna let one go, it is probably Cabango, unfortunately. But that's being said, if he looks like he's fit and firing to go next season, keep him on.
Tricky one, isn't it? Because if it's Cabango, Bowen, maybe Stevens, they're not the type of players you have on the bench necessarily. With the way our bench works, they're either going to be starting or they're not playing in a sense. So the others, Josh, Harry, Gabe, they'd all could fit in at a 13, could fit in at fullback. They've got that versatility that at the moment the others don't have. So it feels like those three are competing. I agree with you, Harley. I think Tom Bowen's ready. I think it's just finding the right game time for him. I don't necessarily think he's a starter at the moment, but it's easy to forget about Ewan Stevens because his injury was so bad that he was on fire. He was scoring great tries. Millard's come in. We seem to have a lot of injuries on the wings as well, if you look. Whether, as you say, it's because of the nature of the game that we play, there's a lot of jumping and running and chasing that just lead to wear and tear. So I would be tempted to sign everybody and just keep it. I agree with you, Harley. It is ruthless. It's professional sport. There's something about Cabango that I think it's got to be a judgment on whether his injury has taken away what makes him such an electric player. Can he get back to where he was? Because I will still say that game against the Ospreys that he got injured in, if he'd stayed on, I think we'd have won that game. I think we would have won it comfortably because he looked up for it. He was, that try was just him ripping it up. And he genuinely scares defences because of that pace. He scored a great one pre-season as well against the Scarlets where he kind of weaved through. So I think for me, it's a medical kind of thing to go, have you still got that? Can you still get back to that? And I mean, whether it's a year that we stand by him because he does have that potential. And I think there were clubs circling for him before the injury. So it wouldn't surprise me if we see an extension to see whether he can get back, but maybe a 1 year if he's out of contract this year. But it would be amazing to see him back and competing with Bowen and Stevens for that. That depth it gives you without, again, losing the style we want to play in at all.
But that'll probably be the one one to keep an eye on what happens with the wingers, I think, this summer, because all fair points. I think I don't disagree with any of you said, but the backlash if a Cabango was allowed to leave or something along that, or maybe even like a Millard or somebody, there would be some interesting comments on social media. Let's put it that way. They'd have to put their hard hats on when they announced that was the case. So, but as you rightly say,
I'm wondering if this is a case where loaning players out is appropriate. Because if Cabango comes back and he's fit, and it's a bit similar to Gwilym Bradley, isn't it? Because he's missed so many games now, he's maybe a little bit too old to be considered an up-and-coming youngster. So he'll want to be where he can play. So it might be appropriate to loan him to maybe a club in the RFU Championship or something like that, just so he can get minutes.
Certainly something that people have been calling for a while, to make better use of the championship for loans as a sort of step above the SRC. And you could see
it seems like Worcester are going to have to recruit an entirely new squad from scratch. So maybe we can make ourselves useful to them.
That'll certainly be interesting to see. That's squad building done. So we'll obviously come back to it as the summer goes on, and then before the start of next season. But I think there's general positivity there. I think the squad's in a pretty decent spot. There's certainly not going to be the sort of mass departures that we've seen in previous years. It doesn't obviously seem like we're going to be losing any major names that we might otherwise would have kept. Probably Thomas Young aside, that we would have re-signed, I think, in an ideal world. But with Basham coming in, that certainly softened that blow. So fingers crossed the rest of the recruitment and retention window is a good one. I suspect we'll have a few more announcements once everybody's back from South Africa in a couple of weeks, and we'll see that really pick up as contracts are finalised going into the off-season and ahead of pre-season. Right, I'm going to stop sharing on that one. And we're all back, lovely. And that leaves me nicely to say, if you're looking at our lovely faces on YouTube, please do feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on whatever podcast platform you're on, do subscribe to Cardiff Central Pod and give us a rating, as long as it's 5 stars. If it's less than 5 stars, not interested in your rating at all. We don't do continuous improvement here. We're already at elite level. Moving on to the second half of the pod then, a bit of on-field stuff. Rags Corner, they beat Bridgend 31-19 on Saturday in the Super Rugby Cymru quarter-final. Tries from Mark Thomas, Matty Young, Alan Rees, Dewi Cross and Joe Williams, as well as 6 points off the boot of Steph Emanuel, as Simon mentioned earlier. Played at 10 and nailed some absolutely brilliant touchline conversions, so that's positive for us going forward, as the Rags suffer a bit of first teamitis by scoring all of their tries in the corner consistently. The game itself, Rags were never in top gear, to be honest. Steph is a great player. He's got great rugby IQ and lots of skill set, but played very much like an inside centre, playing at 10. With a bit of backline reshuffling during the game as well, Tom Bowen looked like he was half hobbling as he came off midway through the second half. But a big battle against a determined Bridgend side, a few flashes of quality when it mattered, and then the forwards putting on a big show. In Alid Ward won man of the match from blindside flanker deservedly, but any of the back row could have won it for their contact area dominance. The tight five were on top of the scrum and the maul. Ethan Lloyd's kick-in got better at scrum half as the game went on, and Elijah Evans looked really good with 2 key line breaks leading to 2 of the tries. Next up, the Rags now face Newport at the Arms Parks. It's going to be Sunday afternoon, 2:30, because of the Bristol v Bath game in the Millennium Stadium on Saturday. Another all-pay game, early bird tickets until Thursday at 5 o'clock. It was 1-1 in games against the Black and Ambers earlier in the season. They beat us at the Arms Park. We beat them at Sputty Park, and they got to the semi-final after getting past Aberavon last week. So that'll be a good game, and it was great atmosphere on Saturday. I'm sure it'll be repeated on Sunday with a decent crowd. Newport people come in droves. Do remember to get your jabs though, because they've got all sorts of diseases. Those people just absolutely great unwashed coming across the marshlands. Looking ahead then in the final part to the first team getting back in action Saturday afternoon, they're playing the Bulls of Pretoria. The Bulls are currently third with 58 points. They're a point behind Glasgow, 5 points ahead of the Sharks. So they're still playing for what? Well, if they get above Glasgow, they'd be home in the semi-finals. So they've got a little something to play for there. 3 times we've played them so far since they've joined the URC. 3 times we've lost. Most recently 12-18 at the Arms Park in November 2023. Grady and Ray Lilo with our tries and De Beer with a conversion. Harley, what do we know about the Bulls? What are we expecting from them up at altitude there?
Well, cliche is big pack. Some Springbok quality talent. A lot of their players are probably players who are good enough to play Springboks, but maybe aren't necessarily the first choice, and they're with them year round. The head coach Jake White is a character. Is probably the best way to go about him. He's linked with every job ever going, but he knows how he wants his team to play, and it's dominance up front. Let the backs do the fun stuff out behind. This season, they've been in fits and starts. They sort of tried to front load this season, so they had a very good first few rounds. There or thereabouts, they're probably going to finish about second with Glasgow's injuries slipping off. In terms of how we compare to them, actually, in terms of tries scored per game, they're on 3.6 or 3.5, so we're getting up on there, but they only tend to concede 2.5 tries a game, whereas we're closer to 4, up 3.4. Yeah, I think you're going to be looking at the likes of, was it David Creel? I think when the inside centre is absolutely fantastic. Emrys Papier. I mean, I just keep going back to their massive pack. They basically quite regularly put out a 4-lock pack and then have Marcel Coutier just stuck on the back just to turn the ball over and get over. You're going to be expecting a very physical game. They're not they're not unbeatable. But teams have gone to Pretoria and won, most notably Glasgow thing. I think it might be a stretch too far for Cardiff. So I think for us, really, I think we're maybe going for a sort of 1.5 side and hope we get through cleanly, because it is a 6-day turnaround for the Stormers game. And I think that's going to be our best place to target either a win or a minimum of 2 points. Bulls have only conceded one, I think, 1 or 2 try bonus. Yeah, let's double check my spreadsheet. Yep, they've only conceded 2 try bonus points. I think both of them have been away. So, but Leinster hadn't conceded a try bonus point at home until we rocked up. So, if any team's going to do it, I think it's us. So I think we've got a chance of a point, but I think it's mostly going to be, as I said on the wrap last night, it's going to be more damage limitation and limiting any damage to us physically. It will be the big thing.
David Creel definitely fit in that description of should be a Springbok but isn't, because every time I watch him play I just think, how is this guy not like a 50 cap international? He'd walk into most other national teams.
Because can you and Jesse Creel exist? It's a joke. It is baffling how good some of those players are, to be fair.
Simon, obviously Harley mentioned there, so it's not a place to go and get many points. Cardiff, I think the general consensus is we probably need like 2 points to be definitely safe in the playoffs from the next 2 weeks. So are we going just to say score 4 tries, or are we gonna try and stick in it and maybe cling on 7 points and see if we can nip it at the end? What's sort of our best chance out here on Saturday?
Well, with the form we're in, I think we've got to go and we're not going there. I wouldn't want us to go there and throw the game, and just look at, we're not going to win this. Let's put all our eggs in the basket of the game the week after. Too much pressure then. I think we, exactly as Harley said, we've got to be realistic about where the Bulls are in the league, regardless of playing at altitude at what for an international ground is an incredibly intimidating ground, probably less so at a URC level. But yeah, I would target the 4 tries. If we get within 7 and get the second bonus point, great. But I would take it as let's kick our points. Let's go to the corner when it's sensible. Let's try to lock them out. I think it's just an incredibly difficult place to go with with altitude, not being used to it, not having a lot of time to acclimatise to it. It's just a kind of roll of the dice. I know, Tony's probably screaming at this podcast now because he said just wrap it all up, beat the Bulls, then, rest of the week on the beach. So if we get 2 points from that game, it will have been, I think, one of the performances of the season. To get that would be incredible. I think if we can get one, we'll have done very well. Just being realistic with who they are, as you say, Harley, they still need a win. They still need to win games in order to get that home draw and to finish as high up as possible. So it's not like they're kind of cruising or anything like that. I think they'll want to get maximum points out of this. We'll go and try and wrap that up as early as possible. Might play into our hands then. They wrap that up, ring the changes, maybe a little bit of cohesion issue with some of the changes. I'm sure who they'll bring on will be equally as massive and talented as those that they are taking off. But it might help us a little bit if they wrap that bonus point up early. But we need to fight and we need to back up what we've done against two quite physical sides. This is the step up from Munster and the Ospreys is the Bulls away. So be really interesting to see how we go. We're really interesting with the team selection. Yeah, I'd target at least one, probably try scoring. I don't think we're going to get within 7 points of them, but that sounds quite pessimistic. But I think it's probably realistic about where they are squad wise and where we are squad wise.
Well, I went with you being optimistic there because you said just kick our points. When have we done that?
Yeah. Score tries near the post. That's all I want from Cardiff this season. Is one game where we get a bonus point and score 3 vaguely near the posts rather than diving
3 penalty
in the corner.
tries because then we don't have to think about conversions.
Penalty tries only, Harley. Yeah, you're right.
Just wait and get high tackled as we cross the line every time. See if that works. Steve, we're not going to do like a full team selection this week. There's too many variables that we don't know about in terms of injuries and who's actually gone to South Africa and all that sort of stuff. Also, been going a bit already. But in terms of how we approach these next 2 games, and probably thinking ahead to, with quarterfinals to come, hopefully, and that sort of thing as well. Is it like full 15 this week and next week and go for it? Or will Jockey have to be a bit mindful, especially with the altitude and that sort of stuff and the travelling of picking sort of a mix and match team, as it were?
Yeah, I think we go out and try and smash them personally. No, the way I look at it is they're 2 cup finals. And the nice thing is, even if we don't win those cup finals, if we pick up a couple of points, that's enough. You talk about going for 4 tries, and yeah, I agree that's that's the most likely way of doing it. But the way to get those 4 tries is probably not to play sevens against them. It's probably not to throw the ball around crazily from the off. It's to go out and try to win it, whilst keeping in the back of your mind that even if you don't win, if you just keep playing, keep scoring the tries, then that can be enough. So I would go, all hands to the pump, go full strength from the off and try to do that in both games. The only twist to that might be is we may try and be clever and try and load the bench, because there's the possibility that if the Bulls do get a bit of a lead, they might slacken off a bit. And then if we're able to bring on Faletau and Young, we might be able to catch them out a little bit. But no, I think you got to approach it as a winnable game, even though it is a massive challenge. Just let's go out and try to win the game.
I agree with that completely, Steve. I don't think us trying to score tries from our own 22 7 minutes into the game is going to be a particularly
I'd be
good
very
look at
happy if you
altitude.
do that.
Having climbed Merthyr Mawr on Sunday, I'm used to altitude, and the bad back on Sunday evening was quite chastening. But I think that's where I was getting at with kicking our goals. Let's try and win it. You take it on as we can win this. We've got to keep the scoreboard ticking over. and just see where we get to. I mean, Leinster away is probably the other tough game in this championship, and we were really competitive for most of that game. Leinster did what Leinster do and just ground it out in the end with whether it was their seconds and thirds, I don't know, but they had to bring on players to get that done, which shows that we're competitive. I don't think the Bulls will take this lightly as kind of Leinster may have done. I think they'll want to just go and steamroller it, and they'll just be relentless. And we know they've got backs as well that can shred you, which we didn't face against Ospreys and Munster. They didn't have that kind of quality behind. So, but I agree with you. We've got to go with the mindset of let's win this, and even if we're chasing for tries, keep playing it tight and sensible, because otherwise it'll be a blowout. And if we concede 50, 60 points, it's very hard to lift that team then to go and get a win against Shark. Is it the Shark?
Stormers.
Stormers the week after. I mean, it's just, we knew it when the draw was made for the season. These were just horrendous fixtures to end with. It was always going to be two of the hardest fixtures to go. But again, I mean, Stormers are beatable as well.
Saying that though, I mean, I know people have been saying ever since the fixtures were released that that's a really that's a nightmare couple of games to end with. But in a way, maybe this is the best way to go to South Africa, because we know we've got something to play for. I mean, if you go there earlier in the season, you probably attempted to look at the games after it and target those. The way it is, these two games are everything now. We've got something tangible to play for, so we probably treat it that much more. We probably treat it differently and take it more seriously this way. So the way it turns out, there's probably a positive to it.
I think there's also. We should have done better.
Yeah, so I still think we should have done better in that first half of the season. Just one thing I was saying, playing Drummer, we had such an easy run that actually we could have been going into this not needing 1 or 2 points to qualify, but we're looking at 1 or 2 points for a home knockout, and then I think that changes your mentality as well.
I'm still some way off not being annoyed by the Benetton game, because I should have won
that. I'm annoyed by games even before that. I'm still annoyed by games before that. One thing I would say is when it comes to sort of like squads and picking the two teams, as I can't get over it then, it is a 6-day turnaround after coming down from altitude. So I think you do have to have Jockey's going to have half an hour on that Stormers game, because if we go fully loaded and we lose half our players, we've got a mix and match squad for the Stormers game, and then we've got a 2 week turnaround where there's what's looking like a 50% chance we come back to South Africa again. I don't know if our new overlords at the WRU are willing to pay to keep us out there for those 2 weeks. Whilst they can have all the rehab there. So I think we do have to balance it. It's why I think it's going to be interesting to see if players like Faletau go, because I think we need him for getting results, but also do we want him more for the knockout game and have him fresh. So I think that's where I think a lot of balancing and thinking is going to be coming.
Good stuff. I'd just add that the other thing about 2 weeks at the end of South Africa is possibly good for squad morale and squad building off the field and stuff. And I'm sure they'll have a fun few weeks out there. As we mentioned, not too many leavers. So if it gets the group a bit closer knit together going into next season, that's not a bad thing at all. Any more on this weekend or anything related to Cardiff Rugby?
I do have a bit of a gripe, which I probably should have thrown out on the wrap, but basically, because you did briefly mention about the Bristol Bath game that's being played in the Principality, I cannot help but see posters for it on my drive from Barry into Cardiff. I don't think I saw a single Judgment Day poster when we were waiting for Judgment Day. So, if the anyone in the WRU is listening, if you want Judgment Day to be a success, can you at least start pretending you care about it and actually start plastering billboards and adverts? Because if people don't see it, if you're using it to try and catch casual fans, they need to know about it. Like, I don't know how many people have seen those posters on Culverhouse Cross round about You know, the fact that you've got one on literally every traffic post, and then a couple of big banners along the roundabout. But I'm sure there's going to be one or two who think, oh, do you know, I'll see what that's about and get a ticket. So that was just my gripe. I've been really annoyed at having been stuck at Culver again.
You sound like somebody who's been stuck at traffic a lot at Culverhouse Cross.
Anyone who has to go use Culverhouse Cross has been stuck in traffic a lot at Culverhouse Cross.
No, it seems very fair, and it is a fair gripe. Although I'm also not surprised that Bristol's marketing is better than the WRU at the same time. If probably most are, although that's my personal opinion, not that of the whole podcast. The whole podcast really enjoys the WRU, and we obviously are massively on their side if they are listening.
Yeah, we're all benefited for blazers and V-neck jumpers.
Yes, that's what we're after. That's what we're after. Lovely. Thank you very much, gents. Good discussion. We'll be back next week, hopefully with loads of good news to talk about as the Rags progress to the SRC final and Cardiff cruise on the beach to the Stormers, having wrapped up the playoffs with an immense bonus point win. Maybe not 100% likely, but you never know. But gents, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you next week.
That was the Cardiff Central Podcast. Please rate, review and share us on socials if you can, and join us again next week for more of the same. And until then, enjoy your rugby.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.